Hey there and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, May 24th, 2022, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me, as always, is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
How you doing today, Trev?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
I am doing good. Thank you for asking. Yeah, it is a nice little balmy Tuesday here in Austin, Texas. I can only imagine it's 20 degrees hotter in Phoenix already. Yes, we are not talking about the weather, though. We have, I would say, some good news, actually, for once we could talk about on News You Care About here, at least in some small way. Trevor, the gaming industry got its first ever union at a major U.S. studio this past week, or this current week, actually, just yesterday, in fact. Kind of pulling from a Kotaku piece here by Ethan Gach. That kind of goes into this. Call of Duty publisher Activision Blizzard, the QA team over at Raven Software, voted successfully and live via Twitch, which I also enjoyed, to officially become the first union at a big studio in the US. The successful vote came after months of negative talking points over by Activision Blizzard about how terrible and awful unions are. Ultimately, the tally ended with 19 votes in favor, 3 against, 2 votes challenged, but obviously they won't ultimately sway the outcome. Under the label of Game Workers Alliance GWA, the group is now legally recognized by the National Labor Relations Board and can proceed to negotiate its first contract with Activision Blizzard to secure better pay and other improved working conditions. We'll start, obviously, broad scope here, Trev. Kind of what were your thoughts and reactions when you first either saw or heard the news at Raven Studios here?
I mean, I'm pretty sure we've talked about them on the show too. I'm just trying to go back and look through what episode that would have been in, because all of the union talk just kind of blurs together. But yeah, Raven was a small enough and dedicated enough group that I feel like I've just kind of been seeing regular updates to this story over the last few months. So it looked like it was kind of on this inevitable path, especially after kind of the Activision Blizzard's case to block this union was dismissed, arguing that it should be the whole studio, not just this one department. And when the powers that be came back and said, no, it's a 20-person studio or whatever, 20-person department, that's fine. That is perfectly fine bargaining unit kind of thing. National Labor Relations Board rejected that objection. It seemed pretty poised that it was going to pass. So it was cool to see it finally do so. And hopefully this will serve as kind of a good template, as we've, I think, touched on before. They've shown that it can be done. So hopefully within Activision Blizzard, as well as within other big AAA studios, these, segments can start or continue kind of popping up and doing what needs to get done.
Yeah, I find it really exciting. I feel like we're at a point now where, like you alluded to, we've talked a lot about unions here, and we also talked about unions back on Input back in the day. And so I just feel like these are conversations I've been having for, 5-6 years now. And to actually feel like we're at a point now where it finally feels like you can see tangible results, right? Smaller indie studios unionizing. And we've had a couple of those in the last year now, to now get to the point where we had talked about studios someone like Activision Blizzard or someone like Naughty Dog or someone of that kind of giant scope, right? Devolver, these giant publishers or studios unionizing. When the first game studio unionized last year, we'd kind of talked about that. And so I think to see, even if it is just a 28-person team within this larger kind of monolithic organization, it's still something, right? It's still a toehold there. And as the Kotaku article kind of makes note of, it comes in the face of months of negative talking points about unions by Activision Blizzard. One of the, quotes that's pulled is, Activision Blizzard worked tirelessly to undermine our efforts to establish our union, but we persevered. Right. And I just think it is a little bit like with Amazon, and now you're starting to see kind of respective like Amazon warehouses or like Starbucks like locations starting to unionize. It really feels like we're at some sort of like a point where like this is just becoming somewhat more accepted, right? And people are kind of understanding that their best interests probably don't lie in someone 3,000 miles away who makes 300 times the paycheck they do, but in the coworkers right around them, right? And that's kind of where their strength and power lies. And so, yeah, I mean, I even just looking at like Raven, right? Like looking at Raven Software's total team, right? Like 350 people is like the total size it looks like. Last December, like we talked about, then 60 employees at Raven Software had walked off the job to protest cuts. And so I think to me, you're seeing like the actual change and kind of grassroots push really leading to something happen here.
Yeah, I think it continues along the same thread that I think we've seen in all sorts of like think pieces that are out there, like just talking about the job market in general these days, like the great resignation as they've taken to calling it, like COVID and the pandemic kind of highlighted. Oh yeah, these people don't give a shit about like the workers themselves.
Right.
So like the workers need to start standing up for themselves and beating the like 100 years of anti-union like propaganda and kind of messaging out of their heads to say, oh, actually no, unions work in our favor.
Right.
So we should probably like they'll work in our favor way more than the C-suite of a company will. Yeah.
I think one aspect you see of C-suite executives and just these larger companies in general, right? The article goes into that kind of more so of like after the walkout in December and facing pressure from the QA staff's desire to unionize, Activision Blizzard ultimately like voluntarily pledged to convert all remaining QA employees across the company to full time, boost the minimum pay to $20 an hour. The Unionizes and workers were the only ones excluded from that pay bump. And like a similar vein, right? Like the bargaining process itself can be long and messy and complicated. And Raven kind of QA had already faced all this opposition. The publisher hadn't decided to voluntarily recognize them in January when they kind of announced their intentions to unionize. And it comes in the face, obviously, of Activision facing mountain allegations of, harassment and workplace issues, and also, a Equal Employment Opportunity Commission settlement in a California lawsuit at the same time. Like, it's just a lot of stuff happening at Activision Blizzard to maybe suggest that they're not that concerned about the like culture and well-being of their employees as much as lots of other things. Say nothing of the C-suite executives who are going to get a giant payout, right? From like the sale. I just think, like it's 28 people making this decision, but I think we're increasing in a culture both in games and outside of it that is just favors employees and workers coming together. And so I think it's super exciting, right? And like the long-term effects of this, right? Like to me, right, if we got from the first game studio unionizing a year ago to a game studio within like Activision Blizzard unionizing now, that's not bad progress in a year's time, right? And there are 350 total people at Raven Software as it went into the QA team's 28 people. I wouldn't be surprised, right, if the other teams within Raven Software also going like, well, let's, we've seen them do it. We could possibly look at doing that same thing, right? And kind of unionizing together, right? And this kind of being a snowball effect both within the studio and then the larger, obviously, company and obviously industry-wide. Activision Blizzard, for better or worse, is a trendsetter. And hopefully this can be like one of the ways in which it is a positive that it kind of is an industry standard.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I do want to give a special mention of this just feckless like spokesperson statement from Activision
Yeah,
Blizzard.
yeah,
Quote, we respect and believe in the right of all employees to decide whether or not to support or vote for a union, the legally thing they have to say.
yes,
Followed up by, quote, we believe that an important decision that will impact the entire Raven software studio of roughly 350 people should not be made by 19 Raven employees, end quote, which I call immediate bullshit on, because you have no problem if those 19 people are your C-suite or your management team. You have a problem with the fact that it is not your C-suite and management team that are making this decision. Like you don't give a shit if one person at the top of Raven makes decisions that affect everybody at Raven. You care that it's these people that you do not value as decision makers for your organization.
right.
And that's really what they're saying there. And yeah, that's just like, even that is more like anti-union propaganda that they're throwing out there, because they're like actively omitting that up until today, that's already what they've been doing, is relying on a few people to make decisions that affect everybody else within the company. So take that bullshit and shovel it right back up your ass.
Right, it's oh my god, yeah, 100%, right? Like even getting to like the end of the article, it's like such a great roller coaster of like feeling like hell yeah, like fuck them, and then also the same thing of being like god damn they're the worst, right? Of like get into right like the National Labor Relations Board, back in December, finding merit in like allegation alleging the company had spied on and threatened employees for discussing working conditions with one another, and that its social media policy was overly restrictive. And then I was talking about Bobby Kotick, but just skipping over Bobby because we don't need to talk anymore about him. Then kind of hopping into like the part that's like hell yeah, which is Activision isn't the only big video game company facing increased scrutiny from the National Labor Relations Board. However, the Raven workers' successful union drive comes on the heels of indie studio. I always get it wrong. I'm gonna go with Vodio Games, becoming the first of its kind to unionize in North America last year, as we've kind of referenced, and contract staff at BioWare announcing a union drive last month. This movement, which comes alongside explosions in union activity at Starbucks, Amazon, and Apple, has even spurred questions at places like Nintendo of America. And then it kind of goes into someone mentioning, thoughts on unionization at a department meeting in February at Nintendo of America, and then later being fired, which just seems very convenient. But like, I just think, there is this kind of explosive activity of unionization right now. And after like decades of union memberships dropping and declining and kind of losing, I think, some of the kind of prestige and sheen on them, it's super exciting to see in the wake of the Great Resignation, in the wake of not even that, honestly. I mean, if you're a millennial, in the wake of 14 years, right, since the original recession, right, in 2008, of just nothing is going to go your way, really, right? You're going to have a recession. You're going to have two wars. You're going to have a global pandemic. Stagnant wages, right? Like all these kind of things compounded on top of each other. And also the generation that is the most acutely affected by the explosion in like student debt and student like loan prices and just the cost of tuition rising far quicker than everything else. Like, I think it has kind of led people to be like, something has to change fundamentally, and people turn into unions. And so, yeah, like, I hope it does, make people realize that this is a viable option, viable path, instead of us talking about it like as a thing we should do for 5 years. Because yeah, there's a lot of shit going against millennials out there, man. It's tough to be a millennial. And so I think, even like the youngest end of a millennial now would be in like their mid 20s, right? They're out of college, they're like entering the workforce, and basically no matter when you left the workforce as a millennial or when you left college as a millennial, you never had a good time at it, right? And I think this is a way to give those workers in their 20s and 30s more power and more say at the table. And yeah, I mean, like, it segues nicely, I think, into the second Kotaku story. which is obviously about Reggie and companies needing to embrace unions if that's the employees want. It's not Reggie necessarily saying unions are lit, let's go all, unionization here. But it is, I think, certainly more nuanced and not just like anti-union than you're going to hear from most executives. Obviously, it can help that Reggie is retired. He doesn't have to run Nintendo of America.
Exactly. He's free from the organizational structure that actually matters, or that like makes decisions on this, so he can say whatever he wants to say. It has no real bearing.
Right. But even in spite of that, Reggie is still someone who I think has obviously a lot of influence within the games industry. People kind of look up to him. And so, his statement is very simple at its heart, which is just like, unions aren't really good or bad, it's just like, but if that's what employees want, they should embrace that. And like, it's very simple. I would think that most people would agree with that. But as we've seen, most companies in the games industry and elsewhere try to fight that tooth and nail. You can get into the stuff with Starbucks and obviously what Howard Schultz is doing there, or obviously Amazon's practices. And so I think even just having a position that is just more neutral and saying, hey, if that's what they want, yeah, okay, is shockingly progressive right now from either former executives or current executives. And I hope it is a direction that more companies take at mind instead of fighting this process out tooth and nail to, ultimately lose a vote 19-2. Right. It's a pretty lopsided victory here. They could have just recognized this in January and we already would have saved ourselves 5 months time. Right. In the case of, Raven Software, or obviously in the case of Amazon or Starbucks or Nintendo of America or any other places that are kind of having burgeoning unionization efforts. Sometimes it's better just to kind of get ahead of the curve and just recognize unions and not try to fire people who just ask questions about what we think about unions, even in a meeting, allegedly, I guess. But Trevor, what do you think about Reggie's comments and kind of what they potentially could mean?
The reality of the situation is if your employees are looking and want a union, it's because you've done something that fucked up and like you're not providing your employees with the safety, security, culture, wages, you're not doing your job as leaders of your industry or of your organization. So to the point that your employees have said, we want more, we want to take elements of this into our own hands. So like, yeah, if you and if your gut reaction to that is to fight it and push back against it, then that should just double down the workers trying to actually get a seat at the table via a union then. And that's and so much of it is, again, kind of the theme of the conversation, like too much power has been consolidated at the higher levels of an organization, and they're abusing that power, or they're not. Like I was thinking today, how absurd it is that the notion of trickle down economics.
Oh my gosh! Oh, we're gonna do this? Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like just how absurd that is as a notion for like. Basically it is Republicans and Reaganisms and all that stuff saying like, we're going to do this and you should be happy with the pittance you get in a literal trickle of this money at the bottom. And it's like, no, like fuck that, like break the dam of the C-suite and let that money be spread more equitably throughout an organization or throughout an economy. It's just absurd that it took so long for like people to start saying like, hey, maybe trickle down economics was bad. It's like look at their own marketing pitch for it. It was always bad.
It was never good. Right. That's the thing. Like in terms of that, and I think that is a interesting point to bring up because I think it ties into so much of the like setting that allowed this huge, explosion in like unionization pushes to happen, is that like that's the corrosive effect of trickle down economics as a theory for 40 years, right? And like what the effects of that on the economy, right? Because despite the fact that it didn't work and that is an entirely bankrupt like economic system, and the fact that Reagan exploded the deficit and debts and all this kind of stuff, because obviously um, it largely won the public discourse, or at the very least shifted the conversation around things enough to where like you had the 8 years of Bill Clinton largely just still kind of hew into just like a slightly softer version of that, right? Like it wasn't until 2008 and a financial crisis, right, and Barack Obama that we like really begin to like shift away from that system. And so like for 4 decades that's how we operated, and or at the very least as like a viable option. And so it just led to so many of the issues that have led to this sudden increase in push, again only exacerbated by the student debt crisis, the housing crisis, the recession, a second recession, the pandemic, right? Like all these other things that are happening, right? And like if there's anything good that can come out of this 2+ year pandemic now, I think it potentially could be this kind of great resignation, like you mentioned, of people just saying we deserve better working conditions than this. This is just not, like, whether it's like service workers just absolutely like fleeing that and saying we can't stay if we don't have better, I mean, if we don't have just any sort of healthcare services, and access to like health insurance, if we don't have better working conditions, better hours, better pay, whatever it might be, to people in white collar jobs or whatever it might be, like demanding the ability to have just better workplace cultures and better benefits and better pay and to earn more, right? Like you always hear of those crazy stats, right? Of like, like Bill Gates or, fucking Jeff Bezos could like give every person in the country like $1 million, right? And still have like $30 billion left. And it's like, what do we like the concentration of wealth, right, is just absurd, right? And the same stat of like, worker pay from like 1980 to now has gone up, almost nothing, right? Versus CEO pay going up like 300% or 3,000%. The fact that, during the pandemic, I just saw the stat today of like during the pandemic, every like
30 hours, every 30 hours, a new billionaire was created. Yeah. I think that was in in like a John Oliver piece recently or something.
Yeah. And I just saw that. And I'm just like, the level of wealth being concentrated more and more and more is only going to have disastrous effects. I mean, not even going to have it, is already having disastrous effects on the economy and the like health and well-being of everyone else, right? Like, and so I will gladly always support people demanding kind of more power and more say about where that money is being spent and how it's going, and the fact that more of it should be spent on them. And so yeah, I mean, I think Reggie's statement is what it is, but I will take it as progress from, actively trying to fight against it for 4 months, as Activision Blizzard did. Trevor, any other thoughts on the unionization push, either at Raven Software itself or kind of industry-wide, and where we're going from here?
I mean, I'd be very curious because I think, is Reggie still on the board of directors over at GameStop?
Ooh.
I'd be very curious if it comes up at GameStop, if his opinion on that will actually, support that, or if it will change. I remember he got added at some point a couple years ago. It doesn't look like he's currently listed as a board of directors there, but yeah, it's okay. So what are you doing apart from saying this nice thing, Reggie? What are you doing to actually support workers that are interested in unionizing? Mm-hmm. Did you do anything to support workers that wanted to unionize while you were at Nintendo? That's like, those are the follow-up questions I would have, that obviously I will never have the opportunity to ask Reggie those kinds of questions. But like, I think that's what, that's like ultimately what I come down to. Cause yeah, like at the end of the day, his statement is, I mean, that's basically just kind of a very logical thing. Unions can be good, unions can be bad. But again, I fall back to, if there is interest and demand for a union, it's because leadership has already screwed up and not resolved things or not addressed things to suit the workers' needs. And so, yeah, the idea of like, if this is what your employees want, you need to address that and embrace it and move forward. Yeah, you should have done that already. But you're not going to because you want to keep that extra piece of the pie yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully, though, if Reggie is put in the position, or any of these people are put in positions, they just kind of see the writing on the wall and understand what direction they should actually try to strive to go to and do right in order to kind of just allow, like, that's it. Like, honestly, my favorite thing that's been said in this entire podcast, you said when you were just kind of like, if your workers are demanding and petitioning and going on strikes to create a union, your company's already doing stuff wrong, right? Like, you have created the environment for that union to succeed, right? If your company's just perfect and everything's going great, there's no need for a union because you're already been taken care of. You're already being supported. You're already being, rewarded for the work you do in a fair and equitable way. And so I think, it's not surprising that workers at Activision Blizzard maybe want a union. But maybe it is more surprising that, like, the workers at Nintendo of America are. And I think it's interesting to hear the contract workers' stories there, right? And so I think not every company, no company's a monolith, right? There are certain, obviously, departments within companies and certain kind of worker types that are different than others. But I think you kind of had my favorite description of it all, which is if your workers are asking for a union, you're probably doing something wrong in how you operate that company, and you should maybe take a look internally and use that as a source to improve the environment, right? Like, it's great that Activision Blizzard gave all those people full-time status and 20 hours, or $20 an hour, like, pay, but also, you could have just done that and it'd have been even better to begin with, and you could have avoided this whole mess potentially, right, if you had just done that kind of thing. And so I think it's reflective of the kind of companies when they start making these kind of decisions, scared that they're going to have to face a union, also tells you that they know the kind of positive changes a union can enact within a company. That's what I would say. Trev, if you don't have anything else,
nope,
we can circle out, wrap up. Fantastic then. Well, that's the show. Trevor, do you have any shout outs?
I'll give a shout out to, I didn't have a chance to dig too deep into this, but it seems to be kind of like a continuation of this story as well. A GamesIndustry.biz article titled "Current and Former Activision Blizzard Staffers Issue Demands to Management," from Jeffrey Rousseau over there at GamesIndustry.biz, continuing kind of along, and it looks like it was originally reported by Washington Post, and so probably what's his butt over there, whose name escapes me. Let me see. Nope, it was Shannon Liao over there reporting it. 12-person team presented a series of demands to CEO Bobby Kotick and diversity officer Kristen Hines and human resources officer Julie Hodges, asking for stuff like employee trans network for support of its transgender staff, 12 weeks of paid parental leave, private lactation stations, and independent investigations around discrimination allegations. So shout out to the team basically that's seeing this victory over there at Raven Software and just trying to, like, keep the ball rolling. Yeah,
I agree. I will give a shout out to a piece over on The Athletic, which everyone should go check out. It's a great site for sports writing, called "What Do I Stand For Here? Why Footballers and Politics Are More Entwined Than Ever." They obviously mean soccer players. It's by Joey DeUrso. It just gets into the kind of current world within the world of football, soccer, if you're in America, and kind of the growing political activism of a lot of the star athletes, probably most notably Marcus Rashford and his kind of campaign to fight childhood hunger in the UK during the pandemic. I think it's a really great piece. It gets into both that, obviously the Black Lives Matter movement, the Rainbow Laces movement, stuff with Ukraine kind of most recently, and kind of the growing activism of athletes there, which can also be found in more and more athletes in the U.S. as well, like LeBron James. I think it's a great piece. I think it's a really great article, and it's really fun, I think, too, because it's actually written by a person who was a former politics writer and then switched to soccer, thinking it'd be an easier beat, and kind of saw his two worlds collide increasingly. And so it's interesting to hear kind of his perspective on that as well. So I encourage everyone to go check that out. I'll drop that in Slack for you, Trev.
I got it pulled up already.
Oh, perfect. Otherwise, that's the show. Thank you for watching in or listening. If you like what you heard, you can go... oh, God, if I don't die. You can go over to thatnerdysite.com and check out all this content there. Reviews, features, articles, podcasts going live Monday through Saturday. You can also go over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite, where you might already be, to go watch the YouTube version of the show. You can like and subscribe to the channel there. Leave a comment. Tell us what your thoughts are on unionization of the games industry. Tell us what your thoughts are on Reggie and where potentially the industry is going to go from here. And also encourage you to go hit the little bell notification to get notified when a new video goes live Monday through Saturday over for the site. Outside of that, you can go to the podcast service of your choice, like and subscribe to the feed, and tell all your friends and fams about it and get more ears and eyes on the shows. You can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to plug?
I will plug this last week's That D Plus show we did on Chippendale Rescue Rangers. We had to push it a couple days because of the actual release of when it came out, just like we're going to push this week's Obi-Wan Kenobi episodes. But yeah, you can go check out That D Plus show for our thoughts on Chippendale, and then this week Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I will echo that. Shout out, you can find me at LiftyLogie, at LiftyLogie, LOGGY. I first want to give Trevor Starkey out here absolute shout outs and props, because I didn't even know that Chippendale Rescue Rangers was even coming out until he had mentioned it like a month ago, probably, roughly. And I really like Chippendale a lot. I'm just like, oh, that's a fun thing. And then basically the podcast happened. The show was recorded, kind of thing. And then I feel like I saw like an explosion of people talking about how great it was, and it was like, I love this. What a time to be alive. Mm-hmm. I saw a lot of people talking about it. And in fact, you might have even tweeted about it too, of it and Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yep.
And as someone who is a massive Who Framed Roger Rabbit fan, that warmed my heart even more. So I encourage everyone to go check out that episode with him and Cam.
Yeah, it is definitely in the like Who Framed Roger. Like it does not hide that Who Framed Roger Rabbit is its like largest influence at all.
Right.
So much so that like he's a cameo in the movie, and he was a cameo in the trailers and stuff. So it's not like a spoiler or anything like that. But it's very much, instead of leading down the like film noir detective mystery route, it is much more like comedy. Let's just do a buddy cop-ish comedy. Yeah. But with a lot of that same like spirit and idea,
which works for a Chip and Dale movie, I think. More. So I encourage everyone to go check that out. And then you can also go check out That Nerdy Site show and That Bond show as well. That Bond show, we would have just had Casino Royale go live when you are listening to this. That's a real good movie. Spoiler, guys. It's a really good movie. We're on, in fact, a really great run of Bond films. And this weekend, as of listening to this podcast, we will have the Quantum of Solace episode go live. Peek behind the curtain means you also just watched Skyfall, and that's also a very good movie. So I encourage everyone to go check out all of those shows. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games and be good to each other.